Chapter 5, Space Travel. When astronomers talk about space or outer space, they usually mean anything beyond Earth's atmosphere. There is no line that marks where Earth's atmosphere ends and space begins, but most scientists agree that anything flying higher than 100 miles above Earth is traveling in space. Spacecraft. A spacecraft is anything that travels in space carrying people or equipment. To get into space, a spacecraft has to escape Earth's gravity. The force of gravity is so strong that a spacecraft must travel 25,000 miles per hour to do that. That's 12 times faster than the fastest jet plane. Engines like those in cars and jets are not powerful enough to send a spacecraft into space. Rockets are the only way so far. Rockets were invented by the Chinese about 1,000 years ago. They were first used as weapons and fireworks. Rockets. Rockets work by burning special fuel at very hot temperatures. When rocket fuel burns, the intense heat forces hot gas out of the bottom of the rocket. If the force is powerful enough, the hot gas pushes the rocket off the ground, through the atmosphere, and into space. Balloon, air, rocket, hot gas. Rocket engines work sort of like balloons. If you let a balloon go without tying the end, the air rushes out and pushes the balloon away from you. In the same way, gases rushing out the back end of a rocket push the rocket away from Earth. The space race. About 60 years ago, scientists in the United States and a nation called the Soviet Union began using rockets to try to put a spacecraft into space. The Soviets were the first to succeed. The Soviet Union no longer exists. It was made up of 15 countries, including Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. On October 4th, 1957, Soviet scientists launched the first man-made satellite into space. The satellite was called Sputnik. Anything that orbits a planet is called a satellite, including a moon. Sputnik was about the size of a beach ball. 4 months later, the United States put its own satellite into orbit. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union had begun. Astronauts and cosmonauts. Over the next few years, the Soviet Union and the United States trained teams of people to get them ready for space travel. Members of the American team were called astronauts, which means travelers to the stars. Members of the Soviet team were called cosmonauts, which means travelers to the cosmos. Cosmos is another word for the universe. Finally, on April 12, 1961, a cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin made one orbit of Earth in a Soviet spacecraft. The first U.S. satellite was called Explorer. His flight lasted less than 2 hours, but Yuri Gagarin will be remembered forever as the first person to travel in space. Yuri Gagarin. The President's Challenge. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, saw that the U.S. was losing the space race. So after Yuri Gagarin's flight, he made a bold promise. He said that the American space program would land a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s. For the next 8 years, nearly 400,000 Americans worked to make the president's words come true. President Kennedy said, "We decided to go to the moon not because it was easy, but because it was hard." Space travelers. The first flights into space were short but important. They proved that humans could travel in space and return safely to Earth. Alan Shepard was the first American in space. On May 5, 1961, he took a 15-minute hop into space and splashed back into the ocean. Alan Shepard. In 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. He returned to space 36 years later at age 77. John Glenn. Oh, Hall of Fame. In 1963, Valentina Tereshkova, a cosmonaut, became the first woman to travel in space. She spent 3 days orbiting Earth. Valentina Tereshkova. 2 Soviet dogs, Shrelka and Belka, along with 40 mice and 2 rats, were the first animals to travel in space and return safely to Earth. They spent a day in space in 1960. Strelka and Belka.